All right, as promised, Fender video this week. We're gonna get this Fender installed. The stuff I'm gonna show you on this side applies to that side, so you should have a good alignment after you're done. And after the break, we're gonna talk about a few needful things that you're gonna wanna do and know about before you start. Away!
For 45 years, the Miller family and the dedicated staff at Autocrafters have been here helping you to restore your dream Ford. Thank you for your support. Here's to another 45 years of delivering parts for your Falcon, Fairlane, F100, Galaxy, Maverick, and Pinto.
All right, the first thing I want to talk about here is fasteners, because the 1960 to 64 Falcon ran a fine thread fastener. That's this one right here. And all the fasteners on this car are a fine thread. And now earlier cars would have run a conical bolt which doesn't have the washer on it with the serrations. But these later cars, the 1963 I believe and 64, ran this. And I think, and I'm not double sure on this because I haven't found a way to actually verify it, but I believe the 1965 Falcon went with the Mustang style, which is a coarse thread bolt for this. So all the fasteners on it, I believe, are coarse. This is not something you're going to go down and pick up at your local bolt place or at an auto parts store. Sometimes you can find the J-clips and all for the later ones, but not the early ones. And please, don't be that guy who goes in and mixes and matches just because he's got a few of the other J-clips laying around. That's not cool. Now, I'm going to move on beyond these guys and talk about what they're for. This fastener goes in this hole back here. It's a nice broad washer on there so that you can move the fender around to put it in a position that you need it to be in. This is a fender bolt for the front of the car. This one goes in these larger holes down here to align the front fender. Again, they're a very big broad hole, so they put the washer on here, and these are actually seat nuts. These are the ones that you would use on the seat when you're putting the seat in the car, so they kind of double teamed on that one. This is the early J-clip. This was used 1963 on back. This is the J-clip they used in 64, and then in 1965, as I said, I think they went to a coarse thread. So you want to look inside here when you're picking J-clips to make sure that you got a national fine on that. And the next thing I'm going to talk about is chasing the threads. You always want to chase the threads if you're reusing any of these J-clips or your bolts, which, you know, a lot of us will. You'll want to go and wire wheel your threads. What can happen if you don't chase those threads, if there's any muck down inside this style of clip, like I said, that was used on the 63s, it will absolutely rip the J-clip apart and it'll end up looking like this. And then you're in trouble because you don't have a way to actually put this in there and have it stay where you need it to stay, because this hole is big enough that the actual center part of this can come up in there. So chase your threads. Even on the standard plunged J-clip, you want to do that. Now the next thing I'm going to talk about is what you're going to want to have to do before you put everything on, before you're putting a fender on for final. Mind you, this is not a final installation. So whenever I'm getting ready to get this install done, I am going to want to go in and put my splash shields in, and I'm going to want to make sure these are all in good shape and in the position they need to be in the car. Now right here you can see some remnants of what they used for keeping water out of the inside of the engine bay, and this is strip caulk. The 3M strip caulk is really nice, still available. You can still get it from most auto paint supply houses, so you want to make sure that you can pick some of that up. All right, one last thing to tell you about before you go any further with this is to pull back and take a look at this. Now this right here is the hole for your bolt that controls the in and out on this fender back here. So this has a stud on the fender. That stud goes into here and you access it from inside the cab of the car through this large hole. There should be a plug here. Your radio aerial hole plug is up underneath this little eave here, and this is supposed to be plugged with your radio aerial. I've just got a plug in there right now because I'm going to go with a different style radio on this car that does not require me to have an antenna on it on the outside. Retro Sound makes a really nice powered antenna that you can put underneath the dash panel on the car to pick up radio stations, all 3 or 4 of them that are left in the United States. First tip for you when you're putting fenders on one of these cars, if you want, you can go down to the local auto parts store and grab yourself some vacuum hose. You want something with a fairly thin wall to it. Usually 1/4-inch vacuum hose will give you what you're looking for because, you know, they're trying to make the stuff cheaper, so it's a little thinner. So there you go. A positive thing coming out of people trying to make things cheaper for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut sections off of this. I bought about 5 foot of it, so if I need more, I can get more. What I'm showing you right now is what I did to cut the center off of it. I grabbed one of my knives, used it to cut this out. Now, if you're putting pressure on this and the fender's coming back to here, it'll hit that and it's not going to damage your paint. Really the main goal of this kind of thing. I think I want those to be that long. Well, maybe that one can be. Use a shorter one for here. Nope. You don't want to try to go over these points because it'll start pooching it out. You just want to put it on the flats. This will also keep you from having a problem with scratching your paint or picking paint up. Bad problem on a painted car, sometimes you can have an issue where the paint on these edges is a little more delicate than the paint on the actual fender, or you can have it if you're trying to wrap tape around the backside. If your prep wasn't top notch, you could lift paint from the back edge of it and it could peel all the way over to the front. I don't want to talk about how I know that. All right, so when you put the fender on these cars, you want to go under with the back clip piece and you kind of set it in place. And then you want to pull it back into position and get it in that hole. All right, I can immediately see if I get this to seat in the way it's supposed to, this fender's just a touch low. I'm going to grab a shim, see if I can pick it up enough to insert it. There. Yeah, that was just a little too much. So a thick shim is too much. I do have a thin shim. All right, now what I'm using for shims is basically a washer, but it's actually a very wide washer. Most washers you get today aren't this diameter. These actually came off of a 1963 Galaxy, or a parts car out in the yard. There you go. And we're cooking with gas. Okay, I'm going to use my big fat fender bolt. You want a little bit of a very small gap around the top back of the fender here, just so it's not contacting the paint. Okay, that is now set. Now you notice in the back here that we are overlaying the fender at the base, and we're a little bit, possibly a little too tight up here at the top. I may loosen this up. It's all really going to depend on what the hood does when I set the hood down. So the next action I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the hood. Put that fender out as far as she'll go. As you can see, we are over the fender here, so we are going to need to pull that fender just a little bit further forward. I hate to because I got a really nice gap there, but it's amazing the different things that will set these panels. I'm going to go ahead and throw a bolt at the very front here. Not making anything super tight yet. I'm going to drop the hood. Gap is pretty consistent, but it's too wide. And you can actually tell that The best way to gauge where your line is at is back here. You can actually see that the fender heads out this way from up here. So what you want to do then is loosen that bolt up just a little bit so that it's tight but not too tight, and drop your hood. Right there for now is a good position. Front edge of the hood and the front edge of the fender are matching up nice. I'm not crazy about my gap back here yet. I'd like to do a little bit better on that because the fender is actually setting out from the door a little bit. We are a little bit this way. But I may not be able to get that back in. I don't know. There's also a bolt in the inner fender here. This one will control this depth here in the corner and also the depth between the door and the fender. So what you'll want to do is grab a bolt and insert it. Anytime I'm making body changes for depth, I'm going to put a towel down and I'm going to use a piece of wood in order to get that depth where I want it. Sometimes the wood ain't good enough. I don't know that I'm going to be able to use that to get that up where I need it. It is loose. There we go. Now that fender's sitting about where it needs to be at the back, leaving my shims in. Some of them are a little tight. Now what we've got going on here is this back edge of the fender is still over. That's something I'm going to fix with the bolt in the very bottom. And it can sometimes be fixed also with the bolt inside. But that bolt inside is usually inaccessible once you have the fender skirts in here. So it is kind of what it is. I think I'm going to go ahead and get one of the front bolts in here on the outside of the fender. Those bolts are these ones that have the quote-unquote seat nuts with a conical bolt on it. Now the conical bolt may or may not be correct. This car has been mucked around quite a bit with by the previous owner, so I don't know if this is actually a factory setup, but it does seem logical for them to do this, although I would also like to see a big washer right here on this side to put in through here. And I'm going to go to the very outside hole. All right, so this hole right here controls this motion on the fender. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to get down here low enough that I can go through the front with my bolt and then put the nut on the back side of it. Now what we're trying to do with this is to affect the position of the fender up. So if we're not in a good alignment and we have too much of a gap, what that can look like is the fender is doing this. The fender's actually laying over, and you can pull it up to tighten that gap so you can't see as much of the inner workings of the fender in there. It also works this front edge right here. There are other ways to work that edge, but the one way that you can do it for sure is to work that bolt, because that bolt will set that gap. Can't complain about any of that. Gap looks pretty good. You can also affect it even further with the bottom bolt on the bottom edge of the fender, but for right now, that's not too bad. Okay, so we have our basics established on the fender. What can happen sometimes when you're putting bolts in though, is you can install bolts in these areas right in here inside the fender. If the inner fender is down at an angle, it will actually affect the way the fender sits and cause it to lay over and open this gap up more so that you're not getting, again, a good straight down visual, and you're going to start seeing bolts and bumpers inside these areas. Gotta go grab a couple more bolts. All right, I'm going to throw the fender bolts in. Should be able to hand turn them in pretty much. Got a spare. Now these should already be set. These are where they're going to be because of the front and rear of the fender. And I'm watching the entire fender when I'm putting these bolts in because I want to make sure that I don't see any roll of the fender either in or out. And that one, I'm not going to do it that way. Now I'm not completely tightening this thing down because this fender probably will be coming back off. It's like a horror movie. Pretty good lay on the fender. It's a little loose on the bumper. These things should be tight down on the bumper whenever you're working them. Whenever you finalize it, it should sit right down on the bumper at a level. Yeah, that's pretty good. We're a little low at the back on the hood now because of this fender. This can change when you're adding fenders into an equation. It can change a little bit. The thing I don't like is I have a shim in there which is making this right, but the shim is also causing me a problem with my hood because the hood is sitting level with the corner back here. Now there is a way to fix that problem if we leave things the way they are, and we may not. All right, so I am laying here on the floor because we have to go in and work the bottom edge of this fender to get this tension off of the panels. This is why putting these rubber pieces in here is probably a really good idea to keep this where it needs to be. I've got a fender bolt. On the early cars, it looks like these are all pretty much the same bolts. And what I'm doing is I'm pulling on it toward the front of the car as well as pulling on it around, like I'm trying to pull it out a little bit as well. I don't want to be over this. In other words, I want to pull this back out in a second, but I want to get this thing installed first, if it'll go on. Yeah, we're good to go. I'm also watching the fender to see what it does, if it bulges or does anything I don't want it to do. This gap is a little too tight right now though. Still a little bit in at the bottom, but that's making a better gap. Now I have some damage on this fender here, which could be causing me some issues. And this door would have to be adjusted now backwards just a little bit possibly. All right, I'm going to open the door and see what we got. We're not creaking and catching on anything, but I would want to go in and actually adjust the fender just a hair forward because we're not quite, I don't like the gap. You'll see here that it's actually pulling on my shim and on this shim, so that means that there's not really enough gap there. These are loose still, so that means that the whole fender actually needs to probably rock up a little bit at the bottom, and that's going to be a little harder to attain. I may have to pull the fender bolts out of the top in order to be able to get the rock I need for this to come up and gap a little better on the bottom. Because you got to remember, you're doing this to the fender, and That can be achieved by pulling out on the bottom edge of the fender here, pulling out on the bottom of the edge of the fender here, but you're also going to then be causing a problem right here. So I'm going to work on this just a little bit more and see what I can get with it. You'll see how much tension that had on it by how that popped. Ideally, the fender needs to come this way. All right, I've got a trim tool in here now. The trim tool is absolutely going to cause you problems because it will actually damage paint. Still not liking that gap. We're pretty tight, but we're fairly even from top to bottom. But right there it's tight, but that is also where the damage on this fender is. So this fender right here in this section may be caved in a little bit, and this door could need to have a new adjustment put on it as well. Because you can see that we're still real tight throughout. We're loose here, which that's because of the door shape here. This down through here to me is just a little bit too tight, and it's in at the bottom a little bit. So that may need to have some adjustments done to it. Honestly, we'd kind of like to pull the fender a little bit further forward, but if we do that, our hood alignment's going to be off. We're not running into anything. If I pull these out, we are not running into the door. Fall down, go boom. Man, if I could get a gap like that in final though, that would be awesome. The door is a little off on the fender, but I think some of that could be because of the damage right here, because this may have gotten pushed in a little bit from here. We're a little high here, all through in there. So that could probably be affected with a shim. No, we would have to align the door differently and probably actually get that to come in just a little bit in this area and down here. And the only way to probably do that would be to put a shim down here underneath to pull that so that that can kind of suck in a little bit. So that's going to be where I would probably go next. All right, I'm going to use a couple of shims. I'm kind of gamble guessing on this. I've got a 1/8 shim and a 1/16 here that I'm going to attempt to insert between the bracket on the fender and the body on the car and the bolt. It is an interesting thing to try to do this. I may end up even having to pull the bolt completely out in order to make it work. So we're going to try loosening it first. And I've also put another shim back in here to kind of help hold that position. See how that thing just popped right out of there? It popped position from where it was at. I'm just going to use a 1/8. Try that and not put the 1/16 in there. It looks like a 1/8 may be enough. There we go. Now we're cooking with gas. it pulls out. Now that gap is pretty good. The door's an issue, but the gap is fine. Now, you may wonder sometimes why the guys at Ford put trim on the bottom of the cars. This gap right here in the panel is exactly why they did that. This was a great idea as a camera shot initially, but at this point I'm kind of guessing myself because I'm getting a little lightheaded from being upside down. So, how good a job did we do? This is a little piece of wood that's just been cut down. I use this. You can also get one of the square yardsticks to do this kind of work with. Just make sure that your piece of wood is somewhat straight. Does it have to be super straight? No. This is an ish thing on cars, not a like, oh my gosh, this is a Lexus. This is not a Lexus. And if you're old enough to remember the ball bearing commercial, you're probably getting pretty old. Your ARP card should be in soon. Now that's actually fitting up pretty nice. We don't have any bump on it, so to speak, whenever I put this in here. It's flat on the back and the front, so down on the bottom edge, it's still pretty good. It's in just a little bit, but not really. No, that's actually fine. I would take that. Where you have a problem on this car is right here. That clacking you're hearing, that lets me know that I've got a big variance between this end of the stick and this end of the stick, which is sitting on this fender, and the door is actually in quite a bit. But down here, you can look at it as we go through the arc of motion of the door. That edge of that fender is in right here. And I don't know if that's because of the mount up, but this is all straight, so that tells me that this may be a problem in here. Anytime you've got damage like this on an edge of a fender, you're going to have an issue. We're pretty straight and flat here. We're out right here a little bit on the fender to door relationship. We're pretty darn good on our top alignment up here. I'm happy enough with it right now that I could take what we've got and kind of go from there. If I were doing this for final, I would definitely want to go in and spend a little more time on it. All right, so how things affect other things. You wouldn't think that being up here at the front of this fender is going to affect the fender at the back edge of the opening, but it in fact does, because you can take this and move it in and out in order to change that position. So if you couldn't get a way that you liked how the back edge of that fender at the door is sitting, you can actually start mucking with that up here by changing this front lower section in and out. Now you do that, you have a bracket. This bracket goes inside of here. Go ahead and get a bolt and nut ready. Kind of working a little blind here. And I honestly don't know if this bracket goes on the front or the back. Squeak, squeak. Probably should have put some PB Blast on that. And then I'm going to take and put the bolt in the front. Usually these go with the bolt section out and the nut section toward the inside of the fender. There's two mounting points here. You can mount inner and outer. I believe this one that's on the inside hole is actually for the Comet. I really don't want to muck with this one too much because there's not a whole lot that needs to change here. What I'm doing is I'm siding off of that rear part of the fender to see if my position is good. This is also your stabilizer for this front fender as well. Can't tell if I got that going the right way or not. When you're doing this for final, your best bet is to solidify the outside bolt and tighten the nut. Because it's on the inside, you're not going to see it, and you don't run any risk of damaging your paint other than the scuff it's going to put on it on the fender. Now that's nice and solid, so what I would do next is put that in. And this is as I had before. You have a nut and bolt assembly. And I'm probably going to need to clean this one up because it's not wanting to come off. So if it's not wanting to come off of there by hand, you're going to want to go in and chase the threads. All right, I've cleaned the threads up on that, put a little bit of PB Blast on the, and no, I'm not getting any money from PB Blast, it's just what I'm using. So, internet trolls, go find something else to do. This stuff is now pretty much set. There's really not a whole lot else you can do. The last thing I'm going to probably talk about here is your fender to hood relationship and that bumper in there. This is why I wonder if this didn't have originally a bigger washer. Again, this car's been into so much, it's kind of hard for me to tell where we're at with it. Doesn't take a lot of ugga-duggas to get that done. Now, see, your fender is nice and stable. One more bolt should go in up here. This radiator core support did take a strike at some point in its past. Up here on the eyebrow section, the original fender, this is all caved in, so is the hood. So this corner right here on this car, when we go back in for start working things for final, this will have to probably be worked a little bit in order to get this back out where it works well on the fender. Last thing I'm going to show you is adjusting the hood bumpers, because that's important on this to get the fender and hood alignment to make sure you're good to go on that. So that's where we're headed now, if I can get my old man butt up off the floor. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, for basically the final portion of this, check my hood sit. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to see how we are in relation to the fender. In other words, the hood sit to the fender. And right now, we're actually a little bit low when I push down on the hood bumper. I can put a fingernail onto it pretty much all the way down. So what you want to do is you want to open the hood up enough, and there's a nut on here, so you want to loosen that nut up enough that you can go in and make changes. Now, sometimes these nuts are tight, sometimes you can't even hardly get them off. Autocrafters stocks these. They got a ton of this kind of stuff. It's pretty neat. So, and I'm just going to turn it up a little bit. Drop the hood. Turn it up a little more until I'm happy with the position. We're kind of a little high on the fender right here compared to the hood. You could go in arguably and do something with that. I feel like there's a strike point. No, there's not. I thought maybe there was a strike where the hood got hit, but I don't feel it now. Good gap here, good distance hood and fender. They're sitting right parallel with each other. Gap looks pretty tasty all the way back. It's consistent. The only place we have any problems that I can see right now is at the very back of the fender where it's not sitting up high enough in the back corner. A lot of times with these old fenders, if they sit around a good bit and you're at, that you buy them off of somebody used or whatever, you can run into an issue where the fender's been kinked at the back corners, they've been bowed, or they've been flattened. There's really not any good way to know what you're getting. This is a used fender that I bought off of a car along with a door to put on this car, because one of the doors on this car is actually a sedan, two-door sedan door that has been converted to a hardtop door, and it's different. And when we get to that point in the videos on this car, I'll show you that so you can see what I'm talking about. But there you go. That's the basics of how to put this fender together. There's a couple of more bolts that need to go in. There's a bolt that goes in here, but this bolt is actually for the stone guard, and that's another video completely, because that's revolving around, you know, grill and all that other good stuff that we'll be putting on after we paint the car. I can probably put the old grill back in here, but it's going to look different because it was bent in the accident. I guess that's it. I mean, there's really nothing else to do. I could go in and start minutiating out this thing to the nth degree, but I'm not going to do that here. So do me a favor, be kind to each other, love on each other, treat each other nice. You guys have a great week, and we'll see you on down the road. All I need now is that modern driveline 5-speed, and then we can put the rack and pinion in here. Then we're talking about some good stuff. Gotta figure out what I'm gonna do about a power steering.